Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our viewers throughout the world on TorahAnytime.com. We'll just remind everybody, Bez Hashem, on Torah Anytime that Tuesday is the annual campaign for BJX. Please do whatever you can to help us, help the community, and help save neshamas. It's mamish giving life to people. There's nothing greater, no greater schus. Okay, so the first shiur that came up was somebody asked about if he's allowed to go to the Bahamas, or he's allowed to go, not forget about the Bahamas, may not be the best place for a Jew to vacation, I'm not sure, but he wants to know if he's allowed to go on vacation on his mother's yahrzeit. His mother's yahrzeit is coming up and he has a vacation scheduled with his wife. He wants to know if they're allowed to go together on a yahrzeit to vacation. So he'll say, what's the matter? So the halacha is that on a yahrzeit, the Sefer Hasidim brings down that a person should fast. This person is supposed to engage in tshuva during a yahrzeit because there's different reasons for that. First of all, when a parent dies, it's like Cain, it's like a little shtickle, a semblance, or a faction of the actual child also dying. Yahrzeit is supposed to remind the child of his own mortality, and therefore it's anhaga. It's brought down in the Svarim HaKadoshim that within 5 years of a parent's death, let's say if a parent died, Rahman Tzlan, at a relatively younger age, let's say at 65 or 70, when the child reaches, let's say 60, with 5 years in advance of that age, she already is supposed to be thinking about death, and supposed to be doing extra special tshuva. And another reason for fasting is that it's considered to be a din. The day that the parent dies is supposed to be din for the child. It's supposed to be a judgment, and therefore the child has to fast. The day of the yahrzeit, the first year, is avelus. The child has to fear avelus. He has to conduct himself, or she has to conduct herself as an avel. The same restrictions that would apply to an avel would restrict to the child on the first year, the first yahrzeit. However, subsequent years, the halacha is that a person should not go to a very, very festive and a celebratory type of event like a wedding. A person should not go to a wedding. A wedding has music and everything else. Other simchas, I say, bar mitzvah, pidyon ben, a bris, not considered to be lower grade simchas, not chas v'shalom to minimize or diminish from the simcha, but they're not considered to be like a wedding, and therefore, according to many shittas, an avel is allowed to participate in that. However, there are shittas in the Rishonim that hold that the restriction of yahrzeit only applies in the first year of avelus, not on subsequent years. And therefore, if a person somebody once asked me, he said that his boss is making a wedding, and you don't go to the boss's wedding, you got to find a new job. You're playing with fire. You don't want to miss the boss's wedding. And you can come up with all excuses. It's a yahrzeit, and he may not understand that. Obviously, you should be sensitive and compassionate and empathetic, understand if the halacha is halacha. But sometimes maybe the boss is not so firm, doesn't understand the nuances, the sensitivities. And therefore, there is what to be makel in case a person has to go to a wedding, since there are shittas that hold that it's only in the first year and not in subsequent years. Therefore, there's what to be rely upon, what to be samech on if a person has to go wedding in subsequent years. That's as far as the shiur that came up about a yahrzeit. Now, yeah.
What if the yahrzeit fell on Purim?
So the yahrzeit falls on Purim, then a person is allowed to participate in all the festivities of Purim. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Yitzchok Paskins, that a bachar in yeshiva, a boy in yeshiva, a student in yeshiva, and normally avel, let's say during the Yemei Avelus, during the Shana, the year of Avelus, he's not allowed to listen to music, not allowed to participate in festive and happy types of events and occasions. And Rabbi Yitzchok Paskins said since he's part of the yeshiva, he's allowed to. I'll never forget my Rebbe, Rebelsky Zatzal. So when he was an avelus for his father, he didn't know what he should do because an avel is not supposed to invite people to his home and make a party. And the halacha is that an avel is allowed to go to a Purim Suda, and I think even during Shiva. However, he's only allowed to go to a suda that he would normally attend. Let's say if every year his brother-in-law invites him, or if every year he invites his nieces and nephews, they're allowed to come, but nobody extra. So Rebelsky wasn't sure about inviting all his talmidim. He usually had a nesiba in the house, and he didn't want to take the psak. He didn't want to, because he felt he had negias. He felt, he was a very loving Rebbe. Anybody knew Rebelsky, he took an interest in everybody's lives. He was a real tzaddik, a really, really special, extraordinary person, which is an understatement. And therefore, he felt like his students were his children, and so therefore he felt he had negias. He couldn't be impartial. So he went to Rabbi Yashiv, and to get a psak from Rabbi Yashiv. Even though he was a gadol himself, he went to Rabbi Yashiv, which is a sign of humility also. And Rabbi Yashiv told him that he could conduct the party on Purim. Now, shiur came up like this. Yeah.
Is there a difference in observing a yahrzeit on a weekday as opposed to on a Shabbos?
So as far as fasting is concerned, yeah. Again, some people don't fast, but others do. Others do fast. In addition to that, nothing that I recall. Nothing comes to mind. Anybody have any other ideas? Okay.
Is it the same for, we're talking about for a parent and God forbid in the other direction?
No, there's different laws. Yeah. Different laws, yeah. Now, somebody asked me like this. His parents have the grandmother in the house, and she's very old, she's elderly, and she's not well. And they want to know if they're allowed to call him, he's the grandson, he's a nurse, allowed to call him to treat the grandmother. So sometimes it means, let's say, it could be as extreme as letting blood, as drawing blood. Sometimes it could be, let's say, suturing, stitches, lacerations. Sometimes it could be other types of, minor surgical care. So the halacha, of course, with parents is that a child is not allowed to treat his parents. Because if there's any fear or concern that he'll let blood, the person's not allowed to make a chabur in his parents. The only exception to that, the Rishonim say that the only exception is if he's the only person that's available, there's no other medical care available, or medical personnel available, medical professionals available, or if he's the top in his field. If there's anybody else that would be mediocre, or that would be not up to par, and they would make a mistake, and mistakes very, very often happen. I was just told, somebody just called me about a terrible blunder, a terrible medical blunder that occurred that almost cost a person's life. Real negligence. And of course, I'm sure the doctor didn't mean to do it, but that's why you have malpractice insurance. People have, it's a very bad thing. So if the guy is the one that is really the best in his field, then he's allowed to treat his parents. But otherwise, one should delegate it to someone else, to a non-family, to a non-child. You could give it to a niece or a nephew. But the shaila is, what about grandparents? Does a grandparent have that same gravity? Does a grandparent have the same severity as far as a parent is concerned? So the Ben Ish Chai has a tshuva about this, and his Torah L'Shma, Rabbi Yitzchok Fingerer, has a tshuva about it, and Rabbi Yitzchok Fingerer says he doesn't think so. But he says that it's better to be machmir, but he says that he doesn't think that a grandparent would have the same strictness, the same stringency and severity as a parent. Now the emes is it should really be matoli and a machloikas. It should be toli and a machloikas between the Maharik and the Ramah. Because Ramah says, famous Ramah, where he quotes the sheet of the Maharik is famous for kibbud of aim. Because Maharik is the one that says that not only do you have to listen to everything your parent wants, right? If your parent, we said this mentioned before, that if your parent wants you to paint your room blue because she loves the color blue, that doesn't mean that her preferences or his preferences should dictate your life. You're not mechuyev to listen to things that just have to do with their, with their general preferences in life. It doesn't impact them directly. It may impact their emotions, but if their emotions are a little awry, and their emotions, should really be seen by a psychiatrist, then you don't have to necessarily, cave into everything that they want because they're acting neurotic. But otherwise, it's a very big mitzvah to please parents as much as possible, and therefore, the marik is not a blanket heter whatsoever. Most achronim say that a person should make every effort in the world to make a parent happy. Nevertheless, the Ramah does say that although the marik just gives a dispensation, the marik says there's no mikor in the Torah that says you have to be honoring your grandparents on the same level as honoring your parents. It doesn't say it at all. So therefore, the Marik says you don't have to honor them the same level you honor your parents. The Ramah says that I don't agree with that. The Ramah says that there's a chiyuv to honor your grandparents just like you honor your parents. So very interesting. So according to the Ramah, the same way you're not allowed to engage in any type of medical care that could cause a wound. Even though it's a wound that is beneficial and constructive, but still a wound. So too for a grandparent, you're not allowed to do it at all. That's what the Ramah would hold. So obviously it could be that the Ben Ish Chai is not holding the Ramah; he's holding like the Maharik. As far as honoring a grandparent, although the El Yazuta paskins like the Maharik, the Bach and the Shach and the Sefer Charedim all paskin like the Ramah. That you should honor a grandparent like you honor a parent. Now, how far does that go? What do we mean that about honoring a grandparent? By the way, most people are not familiar, but even older siblings. It says, Kabed esavicha ve'esimecha. The Vav, the Gemara tells us that you have a Gemara Ksuvas actually. Gemara says you have a chiyuv to honor your older sibling. Now, it's machlekes Rishonim. Some Rishonim say that it's only your eldest sibling, the Bechor, the firstborn. Others say, now Rizal is actually very strict about this. It's interesting because the Beis Chacham Yehuda has a wrong girsa in the Rizal, some kind of printer's error, where he thought that Rizal said the opposite, but it's not the case. Now Rizal says that any sibling that's older than you, and this is going to cause a lot of sibling a lot of family problems, because then you'll go ahead to younger, someone will say, hey, I heard a shiur, and now you have to start giving me respect. Now there's no moira. When it comes to older siblings, there's no moira. Moira means reverence, right? Fear. It means that you're allowed to contradict the sibling, you're allowed to call them by name, you don't have to say, my dear sibling, precious, Reb, whatever, you're allowed to call them straight by the first name, not like a parent. But as far as kibud, as far as standing up for a sibling, as far as acting deferential to a sibling and showing them honor, so the Arizal says you have to be very, very strict, to be very careful, to respect any older sibling. So something that the Arizal says, again, it's a machlokes, but as far as the emes that the Rishonim that hold, that an uncle or an aunt, kabid es avicha v'es imecha, I'm sorry, the S actually, the S is really referring to the older sibling. The Vav, is referring to the aunt or uncle, according to most Shitas. So they say you have to respect the aunt and uncle. Now, it's going back to the grandparent. So a very interesting shaila is, let's say, your father asked you to do something and your grandfather asked you to do something. Who do you take care of first?
Your father.
How do you know that? How do you know? Your father asked you to do something, your grandfather asked you to do something. That's not so pashut. Yeah, there's an interesting shaila. Let's say your father asks you for a coffee and your grandfather asks you for coffee. So who do you have to show respect to? Who takes priority? So emes is that it's not so pashut. There's a machlokes who you should listen to, who you have to take care of first. I'm going to actually quote to you. I wrote down the shitas over here. The Maram Chagiz, he says that Nirali, the Kibud Zikna Adif, that is the honor of the grandfather takes precedence over the father. That's Maram Chagiz. And the Shal Shuvas Yaibitz, the Rabbi Yaakov Edman is Chaylik, and he says the father comes first. Now, you think about it, the Maram Chagiz says, an interesting svara. He says, you are mechuyev to honor your father. Your father is mechuyev to honor his father. So you both chayiv. Think about it. The same way when it comes to choosing between, if a person is asked by both his parents, by both his mother and father, go get, pick up some sushi for me, right? So who do you listen to first? You have to always listen if it's a mother and father asking at the same time, as long as the parents are married. If the parents are divorced, it's a different halacha. But as long as the parents are married, you have to listen to the father first, because both the mother and the child are both mechayiv to show honor to the father. So too over here. L'chayr, it says in Maram Chagiz that both the father and his child, the grandson, are both chayiv, both obligated to show honor to the grandfather. The Yaibit says, no, not so pashut. Not so pashut at all, because the chayiv stems from different places, and therefore he holds that you don't have to show precedence to the grandfather, you actually have to show precedence to the father. Now, a lot of achronim want to be medakdek in the Ramah that the halacha would be that only if they are both present, the father and grandfather present, they ask you to do something, then are you chayiv to show more deference and give more priority and precedence to the grandfather. However, if they're in two different places, then you always are obligated to give to the father respect first, before the grandfather. Okay. Now, interesting shaila arose. Somebody once asked me, this was complicated. Somebody was making a bris, and by the way, when you're making a bris, all the kibudim can make you crazy. I know a lot of people that it drove them to insanity. No, because you don't want to insult this one and that one, and an adult bris is much more that we're doing later. Is much less complicated, because there's really only one kibud. You give a sandik, a kriyas shame, but no, there's nothing, not too many kibudim to have to give out, So. But a child, a baby bris, is a lot of kibbutim to give out. So a guy called me, he said he's torn, he's going crazy, he couldn't sleep. He says, what should I do? Who should I give sandikos to? Should I give it to the grandfather, my father? Or should I give it to my grandfather, who's the baby's great-grandfather? Big shiloh. Very big shiloh.
Oh boy.
So now, it's the baby's not giving out any honor. So it's not the baby showing respect to his grandfather, great-grandfather. Here, it's a young man who had the baby boy, who's thinking about, right now, by the way, his chiyuv of giving sandik is it to his father or father-in-law? We said last week or 2 weeks ago that a chiyuv, because Shaila came up, that the chiyuv of a father-in-law is maybe d'oraisa also. Right? That you have to respect your father-in-law also. However, your chiyuv for your father supersedes your chiyuv for your father-in-law. So therefore, if you're giving out sandakos, unless the father-in-law is paying for the whole bris, and he really is a real monster, and he says, I want it, but he should really say, listen, your chiyuv is to give it to your fatashal, keep it of to your father. And the emes says that he has to give it to his father. He has to honor his father before he honors his father. The better from the next baby, they'll give it to the father-in-law, right? Or they give it to the Rav. Let's say there are cases where they don't give it to the father or father-in-law at all. They give it to the Rav, or they give it to the Rebbe, right? That's a totally different story. But if they're giving it to one of the parents, then they have to give it to the father's father over the mother's father. And if they want to make shalom, then they just give it to the Rebbe, and then there's no problems, all right? Interesting, because the Ramah says, a famous Ramah, it's brought down that you shouldn't give sandakos to more than one time in the family. In other words, that you shouldn't be mechaber. The grandfather, he cannot do more than one grandchild. The Hasidim, others, when it comes to, that's only when it comes to a family member. When it comes to a Rav or Rebbe, then you're allowed to give the Rav or Rebbe more than once in the same family. But that's an interesting halacha. Here, what should he do? What should the young man do? Should he give it to his father or should he give it to his grandfather? It's totally in this machloikis. He wants to know who he should give the sandik to. Should he give it to his father? Baruch Hashem, his father's alive and his grandfather's alive.
How is this different from what was just asked?
So that's precisely the point. Very good.
So I was actually just thinking that.
Okay, they say elementary, Watson, right? This is what we're talking about, right? So this is what. So this is the Shiloh. So according to the Maram Chagiz, you'd be chayiv to give it to the grandfather, because you and your father are both chayiv to give to respect your grandfather. According to the Yaibitz, you give it to the father. You have to show more respect to the father. Now, the emes is, I asked the guy, I said, tell me the truth. I said, your grandfather, you have a big mishpacha. How many einiklach does he have? How many einiklach does he have? He says, plenty. I said, how many times was he sandik? He says, plenty. I said, how many times was your father sandik? Not yet. I said, I think your grandfather would be very nice if your grandfather's Michael and gives it to the father. Let's the father do it. You listen, it's brought down that sandakos gives you shiurs. By the way, tzedakah gives you shiurs too. It's funny because everybody runs. I know one guy, he's willing to pay $10,000 if you give him sandakos. It's brought down. Tzedakah also gives you shiurs. You don't have to spend $10,000 necessarily. Okay, five, whatever it is. I'm saying, on sandakos you could spend $10,000 tzedakah and get the same promise. But as far as the father versus grandfather, so if the grandfather's Michael Shalom Al Yisrael, and he should be Michael, if he was sandik many times, doesn't he want his son to have the brachas? But then it gets more complicated, because when there's a great grandfather in the picture, right? And this Baruch Hashem, K'nayin Hora, when Yidden, we get married young. Many Yidden get married young. They get married, let's say, there's a whole campaign that guys should get married at 21 years old. So you get married, if a boy gets married at 21 years old, it's very, very mistaber, very shaykh, that not only is his grandfather alive, but his great-grandfather's also alive. So now, who should be mechabed with sandakos? Should be mechabed his grandfather, his father, or his great-grandfather? So I saw it brought down that the Minchas Elazar says that in this case, where you have a great-grandfather, and this is the Avi Haben, the Tata of the Rachanimol, of the Bris Milah, the father, he has a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, K'nayin Hora. He has so many daughters, Baruch Hashem. So many daughters. It's gavaldik to have so many daughters. Mamash amazing. Baruch Hashem, Ashal Shelas. So he says, the Minchas Elazar says in Derech Pikudecha, that the Alter Zayda has Kedima, the great-grandfather. Why? He says, because now you have a different chiyuv. You have a chiyuv of zikna, of showing kabod to a zakin. So the emes is not so partial at all. Because the Mishnah Berurah cites a Elya Rabbah. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Mishnah Berurah is in Reishud Ches around Tez Zayin. And Mishnah Berurah cites Elya Rabbah, where he says that, and this is based on the Sugya and Brachas that we had recently in the Perak Haroya. So the Gemara says, the mitzvah actually based on the Mishnah, that if there's a nes that happened to somebody in the family, a nes that happened. So then you have to say, anytime you traverse that place, anytime you go to that place, you say, Baruch she'asa nes b'makom hazeh. Baruch, if it happened to you, right? That I was personally involved once in an accident, and Baruch Hashem, we pass that place, we say, Baruch she'asa nes b'makom hazeh. Chazdi Hashem, Baruch Hashem, the nes happened in this place, For those that remember, the tree fell in my house. I think every day I have to say it. That's a mamash. The Yontif is coming up, where according to many poskim, Magen Avraham brings down that a Jew is obligated to make his own Purim. Any nace that happens to him, or a community for sure, if it's a Yachid or a Tzibur, maybe a Machloikas, but you have to make your own Purim. So our nace of the tree happened on Shushan Purim. So it's coming up next week, next week Wednesday. You have to sell it. It's a huge nace, Baruch Hashem. So you have to say Baruch She'asli Nes or Baruch She'asli Nes Lavaseinu b'Makom Hazeh. Blessed is Hashem who caused a nace for our ancestors in this place. Yeah. How far does it go? Does it go to if your grandfather had a nace? You have to say Baruch She'asli Nes Lavaseinu b'Makom Hazeh. Great grandfather, so El Yerabba. The El Yerabba says no, not so pashut. If your father was alive when it happened. Now, somebody had to be alive when it happened, but if it predates them, then you don't say Baruch She'asli Nes Lavaseinu b'Makom Hazeh no longer. So it could be that according to this Mishabur, according to El Yerabba, maybe Kibbut Aveim doesn't go that far. Yet we say Bnei Banim Harei Kabanim, that grandchildren have the status of children. Right? That in other words, that you love your grandchildren like you love your own children. Bnei Banim Einakluch. There's a famous word that says Einakol is Yiddish for grandson. That it comes from the words Einenu Ukal. Right? The sneh, the burning bush, Einenu Ukal, was never consumed. Because Baruch Hashem, if you're zocheh to have grandchildren, so it's like your legacy, your heritage is Einenu Ukal, is never consumed. Einakol, Einenu Ukal. Okay. So Bnei Banim Harei Kabanim. So some Rishonim say Bnei Banim Harei Kabanim is only B'nogeya to Peruvu. That a chas chalil a million times. And if a person loses a child, and therefore he doesn't have the pruvu anymore to his credit, if he still has grandchildren, then he can be zaycha still to pruvu because bnei banim harei kabanim. However, as far as kibbut aveim, it doesn't apply. You see, the Marik holds like that beferish that it wouldn't apply. L'chayr the Ramah is basing himself on bnei banim harei kabanim, that he holds bnei banim harei kabanim is not only revolving around pruvu, but it's also been negayah to halachas of kibbut aveim. So now going back to this, if you have to choose between the grandfather and the great-grandfather, so again, so the Pidach Pikudecha holds you should go with the great-grandfather because maybe he holds that it extends, as long as they're still contemporaneous, they're still all alive, so maybe it extends that the Chiv of Kibbutz Ziknoi applies even to the great-grandfather also, not only to the grandfather, but to the great-grandfather. And then you have an added dimension of Hiddur, because you have to be Mahadr, you have to be Mechabed Ziknoi al Ziknus, al the fact that he's much older. So, says again, as far as taking care of a great-grandfather, being a nurse for a great-grandfather, l'chayra, there's enough shitas in the portion that would hold that it wouldn't extend to that far, and therefore, even like the Ben Ish Chai who's mesupik about a grandfather in the Torah L'Shma, the chayra of a great-grandfather, he would definitely concede it's okay. But for a grandmother or grandfather, now the MS is that there are many shitas that hold that it only applies to a father's mother and father, but not to a mother's parents. So therefore, if a person needs to be makel when it comes to mother's parents, and there's nobody around at that moment, then he could definitely be makel and do it. What about in-laws, grandparents? So most poskim hold that although there's a chiyuv to mechabed in-laws, that chiyuv does not extend to in-law grandparents, and therefore for in-law grandparents he could definitely do it. Okay, now as far as I just want to mention, as far as Tainus Esther coming up, Ashikar, thank you, Gershon, thank you. There's machlokes between the Ravid Toisus, the Rambam, Keneged Rashi, about Tainus Esther. Whether Tainus Esther is a chiyuv or it's a minug. So most Rishonim paskin that it's a chiyuv. However, Rashi holds it's a minug. He holds that the Torah never says beferish. There's no divrei neviim, there's no divrei kabbalah that says beferish. And therefore, when it speaks about the Yom Yemei, when it speaks about the days of fast, it was never a chiyuv. And therefore, since according to Rashi, it's a minug, Tainus Esther. If a person is not feeling well, or it means that even if he's not a chayla she'ein bar sakana, it means that he's just he's really not feeling well. However, the person has to be careful because Ramah says that if a person is not feeling well and he takes the liberty of not fasting on Tainus Esther, then he has to be mashlim, he has to make it up another day. So you should be careful. But however, in regards to menekes, in regards to muberis, in regards to pregnant woman, nursing woman, certainly those people, that category, they do not have to fast on Tainus Esther. Now, because Tanis Esther doesn't commemorate any tragedy, Baruch Hashem, or any tzara, therefore it has a different status than other Tanesim, and a person is allowed to conduct himself, is allowed to take a bath or shower on Tanis Esther, whereas on other Tanesim he shouldn't, and he's even allowed to listen to music. Although Rabbi Yashav paskin that a person should not listen to music on Tanis Esther, because he holds that Tainus is Yom Tshuva and it's not appropriate, it's not conducive. However, most poskim don't hold like that. They hold that you're allowed to listen to music on Tainus Esther, that it would be okay. The interesting shiur that once came up about a hospital, they want to know, a chaplain in the hospital wanted to know if there are people that are not fasting on Tainus Esther, if they're allowed to have the Kriyas HaTorah from Vayichal, the traditional reading on Tainus Esther. Let's say Tainus Esther falls out this year, it falls out on a Monday. All right, so Yom Sheni, Yom Chamishi on Monday and Thursday, we read from the Torah. We read usually the Parshas Shvuah. So next week we'd be reading from Parshas Kisisa, right? Next week we're reading from Parshas Kisisa. Okay, so now you need at least 6 people fasting in the minyan in order to have the chiyuv of Kriyas HaTorah for the fast. So now, in case where people are not fasting, so Rabbi Yashav has a fasting psak where he holds that Bechlal, there's no chiyuv then to have vayichal, and you would read from the Parsha Shavuot instead, which is very, very interesting psak, very fascinating psak. But what? No, he holds it was oiker. He holds it was oiker. It uprooted it. Yeah.
Let's say there's the doctors there that are fasting.
Then that's okay. Then that's good.
There's one person that's fasting.
Six. Need 6. So 6. Yeah. Yeah. Now it's interesting because Rabbi Yashav, just to mention Rabbi Yashav, he has a very interesting psak about somebody who wants to be a wise guy. And the guy says, I'm a shtickle of a kaifer, chashasham, his person is a shtickle of a heretic, and he says that he's going to mafki himself, he's going to absolve himself from the whole Purim. How's he going to do that? Very simple. On day 14th day of Adar, he's going to put himself in a walled city, go to Yerushalayim. And on day 15, which is the chiyuv, the obligation of a walled city, Shushan Purim, when they have to keep Purim, he goes to Tel Aviv. So he's playing games. So there's no Purim for him. There was a famous I forgot his name, but there's a famous philosopher, heretic in Eretz Yisrael that came up with this ploy. And
so you can also have Purim twice.
Yeah, you could have Purim. Yeah, technically you could have Purim twice. Yeah. So Rabbi Yashav said, very interesting. He said that this comes up often because technically speaking, you could put yourself in a makom, you could put yourself in a place where it's not shaykh for you, let's say, to keep a certain yontif, right? You fly to a country where there's no matzah, and you mafki yourself from the chiyuv matzah because there is no matzah available, or you go to a place where you can't keep sukkahs, so you're allowed to do these things. So Rabbi Yashav says that the same way the Gemara says in Menachos that even though you don't have obligation to wear tzitzis, but if you exempt yourself from wearing tzitzis because you don't wear a 4-corner garment, so b'idan rischa, when the Rebbe Shalom is judging a person, when the time of judgment, chas v'shalom, let's say when there's a rampant virus, something like that is going around, and it doesn't discriminate, then sometimes Rebbe Shalom will discriminate against you. B'idan rischa, if you play games, Rebbe Shalom will play games with you, and therefore, even though technically speaking he's off the hook from the mitzvah, Rabbi Yashav said that Rebbe Shalom will get him back. And it's something that's very, very dangerous, to do. Yeah, sorry, yes.
Are they off the hook from the mitzvah because they're purposely putting themselves into this situation?
Yeah, but they're not. When the chiyuv comes, when the obligation comes, they're not in the realm of. They're not in the milieu. They can't keep it. That's it.
But can someone say to themselves, "I know when sukkahs is, and that they're going to put themselves in some place where they can't build a sukkah." And they're planning this ahead of time, obviously.
Right. So we've brought down there's some big machlokas about it.
This is the famous debate.
So I'm saying it's a big machlokas, but technically speaking, when the chiyuv comes, he's not within the realm of it. So, yeah, he's honest. Okay. Now just going to wrap up because I just have a lot to take care of. Baruch Hashem. So as far as Shalach Manos, and Bez Hashem, next week Sunday we'll devote much more time, Bez Hashem, to all the Halachas of Purim, Mamash and Yonah Diyoma, the topic of the day, Bez Hashem. But Shalach Manos, there's a machlokes, the famous machlokes of the Trumas Hadeshin and Menois Levi. Menorah Levi was Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, the Mechaber of the L'chadaydi, Baal L'chadaydi. He was a big Mekubal, and also a big Talmud Chacham, huge Talmud Chacham in Sfas. The Trumas Deshen holds that the whole point of Mishloach Manos is to make sure that other people have what to eat for the Suda. And we said many times that that's why it's more appropriate to give somebody Shalach Manos. You should give something that's edible, something that's food, not just, let's say, like a nash. We should give something that's has tamsis, that has substance. Even give a piece of chicken, give a piece of kugel, something, a challah roll, something that the person can benefit from at the Suda. Not something that's frozen that has to defrost. Not something that has a chicken that has to be shechted. Although according to some, some shitas you're still yaitse, but it's not considered to be prepared. It's not considered to be edible. You wanted to make a real statement on Purim, so you can bring a little shepsel, bring a little sheep on a leash, and say, here's your shalach manos. Technically, you could be yaitse shalach manos like that, but it's really not but that's a Trumas Deshen. Trumas Deshen says you're bringing it for the Suda. Menorah Levi says that's not what you're doing. He says you're doing the whole point is altzreyus, is to chavivus, is to show, and the emes is that there's a shita that holds that the reason why you need the reyes is because there were Jews that accused other Jews. It brought down from different Mekubalim that there was a shita that says that there were Jews that accused other Jews of not being faithful to Yiddishkeit, and they wouldn't eat in their homes. They said that you're part of the Achashverosh conspiracy. And therefore that they started judging each other. And that's why Purim, there was dafka chiyuv to go ahead and to eat from everybody. To show the Shalom Yisrael, that we have achdus and we trust each other's hashkachas. To bring unity and to foster peace. And to show that you don't judge fellow Jews. So, but the Menorah Levi holds that the whole point is to befriend other people. And therefore, according to him, you don't have to give food. Even if you give money, you could give money to somebody. You could give a gift to somebody, a Judaic gift to somebody. It doesn't have to be food according to Menorah Levi. And there's a lot of nafkaminas halacha between the machlokes between the Trumas Deshen. That's one nafkamina halacha whether you have to give food. According to the Trumas Deshen, you would have to give food. According to Menorah Levi, you don't have to give food. There's a lot of nafkaminas halacha. We're just finishing up. I'm finishing up in a minute. Yeah. So, I'm finishing up in a minute. I want to tell you. So, right, so it's interesting because there's some shitas that hold, as a matter of fact, the Ramah wrote a sefer on Megillah called Sefer Mechir Yayin. And he actually gave it as a gift to somebody for Shalach Manos. The Menorah Levi, so his sefer on Purim was Menorah Levi. That was his sefer. And he actually also gave it a gift as Shalach Manos. So you see that the Chayr, they held they could give David Torah. The Torah enlivens you. Torah makes you happy. Torah gives you joy. Torah, Tamar ki tov Hashem. See and taste that Hashem is good. That means that Torah, the learning Torah is geschmack. It's delicious, as my Rebbe used to say. So therefore, if Torah is delicious and Torah is almost like food, therefore you could give Shalach Manos, you could give Divrei Torah to somebody for Shalach Manos according to these shitas. But again, according to Trumas Deshen, it wouldn't work. You have to actually give food, and you should give edible food for Shalach Manos. Okay, so anybody have any questions, comments, and with that we'll conclude. Bez Hashem, looking forward to seeing everybody back for the bris. Hopefully, if you make it later on, Bez Hashem, from Mincha at 4:45. Okay, Yashikoyach. Anybody?